Hello people of the world, I really am Dave.
And I am, of course, Jacob.
And today we're looking at Intel's new mainstream 300 series motherboard chipsets and asking the question, what's the point?
Yes, Intel have finally released the mainstream 300 series motherboard chipsets for the 8th gen Coffee Lake desktop processors, some 6 months after they first launched.
Yeah, at the beginning all we had to go on was the high-end Z370 chipset to drop those new chips into, whether they were low-end Core i3 or the tip-top Core i7 K-series CPUs.
But now we have the H370 and B360 chipsets, along with the lowest of the low H310 and business-oriented Q370 chipsets that we just couldn't give a pair of fetid dingoes' kidneys about.
So, what's the difference between the old and newer chipsets?
The original Z370 motherboard chipset was the peak of Coffee Lake goodness, offering the full 24 lanes of PCIe 3.0 support to deliver full bandwidth to your powerful graphics card and allow you to drop a pair of NVMe SSDs into the twin M.2 sockets the boards carry.
It's also the chipset aimed directly at the unlocked K-series processors and their overclocking capabilities, which also made it a difficult choice for anyone not going for a super high-end Coffee Lake chip.
So the cheaper mainstream H370 and B360 boards would surely make sense for that market. Neither officially support overclocking, though there's a chance some manufacturers will find a way around it in the future, and the H370 only has 20 PCIe lanes and the B360 12.
But what do they have over the Z370? Well, that's native support for USB 3.1 Gen 2.
Yep, big stuff, really big stuff.
Yeah, I mean the Z370 boards got around this by adding in AS Media chips to still be able to offer the necessary ports, so it wasn't like anyone was really crying out for it.
Asus and Gigabyte Z370 boards use core optimization shenanigans to get around the all-core 4.3 GHz limits of the 8700K, which means they can run these chips as fast as possible and you get 4.7 GHz at the top end.
And that makes those Z370 boards much faster across the board.
The H370 and B360, because they're overclocking blocks, cannot run the chips to such an extent, except for certain single-threaded situations.
But then you're not going to want to drop a K-series chip into these mainstream motherboards anyway. With a non-K CPU, then the overall performance isn't that much different.
Where there seems to be a sizable difference is in the storage performance. Our Samsung 960 EVO NVMe drive is considerably slower in the H and B series boards than in the Z370s.
Between the H370 and the B360 again, there is very little performance difference. You get fewer PCIe lanes and USB ports on the B360, but if you want a real budget board, that's potentially a better bet than a H370.
Though, if we're talking about pricing, well, that opens up a whole can of worms.
The problem is that both the H370 and B360 chipset boards are shipping for between £100 and £150, at least for the ones that we've seen so far. And that's a real issue when there are genuine Z370 boards available for under a ton.
With Intel holding back the H370 and B360 boards until 6 months after launch, despite already shipping mainstream CPUs in the Coffee Lake generation, it has meant motherboard manufacturers have had to create their own mainstream ranges.
They've locked bits off the Z370s and produced boards with smaller feature lists and created affordable motherboards still using the higher end chipset.
The result is that now you can essentially get a high-end H370 with a greater feature set than a Z370 board for a higher price and with lower actual performance.
That doesn't make sense. A high-end H370 board is an oxymoron.
None of this is the motherboard manufacturer's fault. They've had to create their own mainstream Coffee Lake market in lieu of an official Intel one. It's likely that prices of the new boards will rapidly come down, but it does mean that H370 and B360 boards are going to be tough to recommend for budget gaming builds until they do.
So if you take the Z370 and H370 Gigabyte Aorus boards as an example, they're both the exact same price and have almost identical feature sets, but the Z370 board obviously has the better performance overall.
What of the oft-mentioned but officially non-existent Z390 chipset? We first heard tell of an even more high-end Z390 at Computex last year when Asus were introducing overclocking on the new X299 and Z370 motherboards.
Yeah, we know it's coming, but it doesn't look like it's going to hit the shelves until around September or October this year. But what's it really going to add to the range?
Yep, USB 3.1 Gen 2 support.
Yeah, we're excited too.
Yeah, according to one motherboard manufacturer that we've spoken to, the Z390 was originally set to replace the Z370 after 6 months, so there was meant to be a complete refresh of the Coffee Lake chipsets happening right now.
Yeah, and that would have gone down really well. The board makers would have surely kicked up a fuss at the Z370 only having a 6-month shelf life, and probably would have only taken an incredibly limited allocation at their launch, which maybe explains why the launch of the Z390 was kicked back to the end of this year.
The Z390, however, will need something more than just some extra USB support to entice any potential buyers. But what could that be, I reckon?
Desktop Core i9, anyone?
Yeah, Intel have now announced Core i9 chips for both high-end X299 desktop and laptop Coffee Lake ranges, so it makes sense for them to take advantage of the marketing win of dropping an 8-core i9 chip into the enthusiast desktop segment too.
So there it is, a mainstream chipset launch that has been rendered largely uninspiring by the massive delay in launching them. It's not been a great release schedule for motherboard manufacturers, and you can bet there are some very unhappy folk out there because of it.
Our advice, unless you're a corporate customer or can find either H370 or B360 for well under £100, then you're better off building a price-conscious gaming rig around a well-priced Z370 board.
Yep. So, thanks for watching, and if you've liked, loved or felt kind of warm and fuzzy about what you've seen and heard so far, then give us a like and subscribe and check back for more gaming and hardware goodness.
Bye!
Thanks for watching!